It being 15 seconds before 6 p.m, in accordance with the resolution of the House, proceedings are now interrupted to enable the Honourable Tania Mihailuk to make her first speech without any question before the Chair. The Honourable Tania Mihailuk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. There is almost nothing more futile than a politician without conviction. In the end, they have no credibility and deliver little for those they serve. With these words, I began my first inaugural speech as an elected member of the New South Wales Parliament. While I've seen much in the last 12 years, I know one thing has remained constant: the unshakable certainty within me of the truth of this statement. It falls to me now to make a second inaugural speech, and I'm acutely aware of the rare privilege that has been bestowed on me to serve in both chambers of this great Parliament. When I first entered Parliament in 2011, I was one of only 20 Labor MPs, following the Coalition's return to government for the first time in 16 years, with 69 seats, a 23-seat majority. It was a time when the world was still dealing with the aftershocks of the global financial crisis. The world economy was reeling from the worst recession since World War II, yet despite the terrible economic upheavals sweeping the globe, our own economy was proving remarkably resilient in weathering the storm. By almost all indicators, we were performing better than most other advanced economies. While there was a downturn, a recession was avoided. Inflation was sitting at 3.3% and would stabilise at an average of 2.5% over the following 5 years. 12 years later, I re-enter as an MLC for One Nation, with Labor back in governing, albeit in minority. We find ourselves in a world that is really only just beginning to grapple with the economic aftershocks of another global crisis, and that is, of course, the COVID pandemic. This time, however, our nation cannot boast of the same economic resilience. Inflation is now at 7%, figures that we have not seen since 1990. Our people are hurting. Mums and dads across the state are struggling with ever-increasing mortgage repayments on top of soaring weekly grocery and utility bills. Our businesses and industries are crying out for help. From bricklayers to diesel mechanics to chefs and kitchen hands, reports from hiring managers are the same. It doesn't matter how high a salary is advertised, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of vacancies that are just not being filled. Scores of medium-sized businesses across metropolitan Sydney that formerly had upwards of 75 employees on their books now have only 15. Not because there's any shortage of work, but simply because they cannot fill their vacancies. In the regions that our abattoirs and our poultry plants need workers, our farmers need harvesters and shearers, our regional businesses need staff. These skills shortages are being felt acutely also by the New South Wales mining industry. The industry last financial year contributed $16.7 billion in direct spending to the New South Wales economy, while supporting over 30,000 direct jobs and another 180,000 indirect jobs. But the industry is desperate for skilled workers. The average number of New South Wales-based mining engineering vacancies is 128 per month. The figure exceeds the national total of 100 mining engineering students who graduated for the entire year of 2022. From mining companies across the state, whether they're in Illawarra, the Central West or Muswellbrook, vacancies are staying open for months and often remain unfilled. Mr. President, we live in an era when more young Australians than ever before are going to university, and I've always valued education, but increasingly we are hearing of the inadequacy of universities to equip our young people with real-world skills to contribute to our workforces. In a recent survey of New South Wales businesses, 29% of respondents considered that existing training does not match their business needs. As one respondent to the survey said, and I quote, "Finding staff who are adequately trained and qualified is so difficult. Universities are failing to provide a genuine education to students." Universities are, however, booming, with 43% of Australian 20-year-olds in university, yet only 12% are in vocational training. Young people are increasingly willing to have the university experience, but less and less willing to get their hands dirty in the real work that fires the machinery of our nation's economy. There is a real disconnect between our industry needs and educational curricula. In my time in this place, I tend to get to the bottom of how this rift can be mended. I want to shift our focus back to an education system that focuses on the basics that mums and dads care about: literacy, numeracy, and the actual common sense fundamental skills that lead to jobs, rather than left-wing indoctrination. As a society, we need to be imparting to our young people the abilities and skills to be productive citizens and the motivation to pull together for a cohesive, prosperous nation. Yet during the pandemic, our governments thought it was a good idea to get large swathes of our population accustomed to being paid double the dole to stay home. Our welfare system seems increasingly to be entrenching long-term unemployment rather than helping the unemployed get themselves back to work. A lazy attempt to fill the workforce shortages by simply tuning up the immigration tap is not the answer either. With no real plan to funnel skills into industries and regions that actually need the help, no real plan to house new arrivals, this slapdash approach defies common sense. And I echo the sentiments recently expressed by the Mayor of Fairfield. The ruling class cannot continue to view Western Sydney as the landing pad for their expansive immigration policies. We in Western Sydney have indeed always been generous and welcoming, but it is about finding the right balance. Whole suburb worth of people cannot continue to be placed in the same areas. With immense burdens already placed on our housing, on our health system, infrastructure, and indiscriminate opening of the floodgates will stress already burdened communities to breaking point. Recent surveys show that 70% of voting Australians think we need to lower levels of immigration, which is, of course, why the Prime Minister was not upfront about his real immigration agenda before the last federal election. When I talk to businesses, staff or workers, they tell of the immense frustrations in trying to navigate the process of obtaining overseas labour. Having to reapply every time, having to wait over a year for anything to progress does very little to alleviate job vacancies that are required to be filled immediately. If we're really serious about looking overseas for skills, start with the businesses that actually need the help and let them recruit who they need without the stranglehold of red tape. The federal Labor government's plan to indiscriminately bring in 700,000 migrants by the end of next year would not effectively address these real problems and will simply place further stress on communities that are in need. It is a far cry from the sensible, skilled immigration policies of yesteryear that were targeted to the skills we need and specific projects to build up our nation in the post-war era, when migrants came to our shores to seek a better future in exchange for their vital contributions to our nation's infrastructure and industry. Of the 100,000 people who worked on the Snowy Mountain hydroelectric scheme between 1949 and 1974, more than 65% were migrants from over 30 different countries. These people brought their expertise and hard work to our shores, enriching our nation in the process. When my own parents came to this country in 1959 and 1960, they weren't looking for a handout, but for an opportunity to contribute to the Australian way of life. My father worked at Australian Post and later at Telecom. My mother as a optometrist at Myers and later for 2 decades in aged care. Within a week of arriving in 1972, my husband's parents were supporting regional industry. They both worked for email, electricity meter and allied industries in Orange on the production of white goods. In fact, most fridges and white goods in the 70s and 80s, if you bought one, came from Orange. My father-in-law was on the manufacturing side and my mother-in-law would work on the assembly line. I have to say and I do want to make just a special note to my parents and my in-laws. They came here with nothing when they arrived into Australia. They brought with them their traditions, their customs, their faith, their language, and their values, their good values. And they also brought with them their terrific work ethic. And they instilled in their children, both my husband and I, and indeed our grandchildren, a love of Australia, a love of this nation, and a sense of gratitude. And I too paid tribute to the governments of the time that allowed my family to come into Australia, and indeed the many opportunities that have been bestowed on our families by living here in Australia. I was also privileged to experience the positive fruits of immigration in my previous roles, representing the people of Bankstown, and growing up alongside my fellow citizens of migrant backgrounds in southwest Sydney. There I have found a hospitable, welcoming community made up of 130 cultures with 60 languages spoken. These are people and families who have come to our country and helped make it a better place. From the different cuisines to the plethora of cultural holidays that are celebrated throughout the year, to the vital roles diverse small businesses contribute to the local economy, the richness of multiculturalism is there to be enjoyed by all. Mr. President, I wasn't able to deliver a valedictory speech for my time as member for Bankstown, so I'm eager to place on the record my enormous gratitude to the people who elected me as their MP for 12 years. While I'm now honoured to have the whole of New South Wales as my constituency, I will never let go of my special loyalty to Bankstown and its people, and I'll continue to fight for some of the core issues that I campaigned during my time as their MP. Throughout my term as a member for Bankstown, I campaigned tirelessly to both upgrade Bankstown Hospital and the car park. As a Bankstown local who gave birth to my children at Bankstown Hospital, I know just how important it is for our community to have a world-class and easily accessible hospital. After many speeches in Parliament and sustained pressure, the then New South Wales government, or the then coalition government, finally came to its senses and backed my calls for improved public health services by announcing a new Bankstown Hospital in March of 2019. But the fight didn't end there. It took 4 years to establish where this new hospital would be. And finally, the former Premier Perrottet, or the Perrottet government, finally pledged to build the new hospital across from the existing site. And that was announced in March of this year. It is now, and I haven't heard anything from the Labor Party, from the new Labor government about when and where the new Bankstown Hospital will be built, and I'll continue to press the new government to honour the pledge of their predecessors to the people of Bankstown and to East Hills and to South West Sydney, and commit to rebuilding the hospital across the road from the existing site. Another issue that I fought for as member for Bankstown is the restoration of the Liverpool by Regents Park train line. And I'll never forget when that was removed on the 20th of October 2013 by the then Minister for Transport, Gladys Berejiklian. It caused major upheaval for the residents west of Bankstown. It meant that a direct service was replaced, a direct service to the city was replaced by 3 trains. You had to have 2 different interchanges to go to the city. Now, finally, after much campaigning and petitioning, there was an agreement that there'd be a partial restoration of that service. I hope that the Labor government respects the communities that voted them in west of Bankstown, and all those seats voted Labor. I hope they restore that service to full capacity. It should be restored. I'd also like to pay tribute to the many community members that helped me campaign for the easy access lifts at Birrong and Yagoona. We're still yet to see an easy access lift at Chester Hill and Villawood, and again I remind the Labor government they have a duty of care to the many marginalised communities in Villawood and Chester Hill to ensure that those lifts are built in the future. It was my privilege to work with countless community leaders to obtain better facilities for local organisations, including sporting grounds, clubhouses, church halls, school playgrounds, cultural associations, community services providers and many more. It was one of the greatest pleasures of my role as the then MP for Bankstown to meet so many good people and work with them towards a common goal of positive outcomes for community participation, inclusion and cohesion. I'm not afraid to focus on and fight for the issues that really matter to families and communities across South West Sydney and every single person that supports common sense policies throughout New South Wales. In late 2020, I remember clearly just how frustrated my constituents my then constituents in Villawood, Georges Hall and Bass Hill were by the constant and frequent power outages that they were experiencing due to our failing energy grid. 4,600 customers and 1,200 households did not have access to power. These kind of outages in summer will only get worse with this ridiculous obsession to transition to unreliable power sources while Liberal and Labor neglect our existing energy grid. As the Bankstown MP, my largest street meeting I ever held or coordinated was with these fed-up residents. And I remember writing to both Ausgrid and the then New South Wales government to ensure that every single resident received the compensation that they were entitled to. When the power goes out, local businesses like Chinchilla Cafe in Bankstown Plaza and Toscana Ice Creamery in Georges Hall lose revenue, they lose stock, and in the end they have to put people out of work. These mum and dad businesses are some of the people that I have assisted in the past, and I can assure every single small business owner and resident in New South Wales that I will not let an obscene obsession to transition to a different form of energy source impact their access to a fundamental right like electricity, and it is a fundamental right. The Australian Energy Market Operator and New South Wales Government documents have forecast blackouts in our state across after the closure of Eraring Power Station in 2025. This is nothing short of a looming disaster for the New South Wales economy, but particularly damaging to the industrial base of Western and Southwestern Sydney. As a member of this place, I am prioritising jobs in the regions also, like in the Hunter, that are reliant on our natural resources and forestry sectors, and industrial heartlands of Western and Southwestern Sydney that simply need a reliable electricity grid with power bills that don't send their work offshore. A strong New South Wales also needs a strong construction sector with the ability to deliver good homes. In the other place, I spoke up urging the former coalition government not to water down home building statutory warranties for a defective apartment construction work. This was several years before the Mascot and Opal Tower sagas, and I always felt a great sense of disappointment that my former Labor colleagues never quite understood the gravity of the issue in 2014, despite my warnings that are available on record for all to see. Quality, affordable, fit-for-purpose homes for families coupled with sensible planning should be the priority, not a quick buck for developers. The best way to address the housing affordability issue is by abolishing the green tape that is adding hundreds of thousands of dollars to the cost of a family home. And we know that we have a timber shortage in our state, something that is being exacerbated by the left, that are completely opposed to sustainable native forestry. The last thing that first home buyers and young families in places like Picton, Camden and Leppington need is unaffordable building costs due to mandated net zero nonsense and imported timber from overseas. Mr President, I've spoken up before on the dire situation of timber shortages in our state, which is impacting not only on vital jobs, but indirectly on whole communities. As families leave town to find other work, they leave those remaining bereft of local skills and services. We are seeing this happening already in the timber towns of the Illawarra and in places like Tumut, where the timber shortages have caused the reduction of worker shifts, which has in turn forced workers to leave town. Meanwhile, our construction industry is scrambling to overcome a shortfall of 1.7 million tonnes of timber. Now, while we all talk about housing, we might want to have a bit of a think about how housing is actually built. New South Wales is rich in natural resources, but the left wants to ban coal and forestry. This insanity will send electricity prices and the cost of building materials to record highs. Only last week it was reported that the Australian energy prices are among the highest in the world, with Sydney household bills forecast to rise by another 20%. But New South Wales can and should be a global energy superpower with flourishing coal, gas and nuclear power, plus the renewables that have already been built. I was often the lone voice in the Labor caucus room, willing to stand up for the tens of thousands of jobs in our state supported by mining and forestry. And I will continue to make my voice heard, albeit now through One Nation, a party that wholeheartedly supports the natural resources industry. I intend to continue the work to strive for better protection also of our vulnerable children. It was an area that I was deeply passionate about in the past and I will continue to be passionate about. In the other place, I called on many occasions for reform, including in 2016 when I introduced a private member's bill to protect children from parents who have previously been found guilty of serious offences against children. We as a society must be judged by how we treat the most vulnerable among us, and no one should rest easy while those who are duty-bound to protect cannot. Sorry, I should say those that we are duty-bound to protect cannot. As a person of faith, Mr President, I also want to put another very important issue on record here today. One of the issues that I'm most passionate about is the ability to express religious freedom in our state. And in 2019, I was proud to help form the New South Wales Parliamentary Friends of Religious Freedom with colleagues from across the political divide. New South Wales is blessed to have many communities of faith, be it Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism or Sikhism, and many more. Families from all walks of life can be assured that I and my One Nation colleagues will protect their interests when it comes to freedom of religion. Mark Latham was an absolute champion of religious freedom during the Joint Select Committee on the Anti-Discrimination Amendment, Religious Freedoms and Equality Bill of 2020. Over 10 months, This committee examined 192 submissions and 4 days of hearings with evidence provided by 57 witnesses from 47 organisations. The report published by the committee should be enacted in full. It laid out clearly the absolute necessity for enshrining legal protections against religious discrimination. 65% of New South Wales residents identify as religious, yet alongside South Australia, we are the only jurisdiction that does not have protections against religious discrimination in state law. We know that the left, which dominates this parliament, does not care or value religious expression as a fundamental right of social policy in New South Wales. But I will fight to make sure that religious freedom becomes enshrined in law in this very chamber. I cannot stand here today without offering my profound thanks to all those who have assisted me on my journey to One Nation. To my One Nation colleagues, in particular the New South Wales leader of the One Nation, Mark Latham, to Rod Roberts, to our federal leader, Pauline Hanson. I'd also like to acknowledge the federal and state executive of the One Nation Party. In particular, I acknowledge Neil Turner and State Director Amit Batish, and indeed all the many candidates that I met throughout the campaign. I do want to acknowledge the 17 candidates that stood for One Nation across New South Wales, to their family and friends, and thank them for flying the flag for One Nation, along with all the volunteers who fought so hard on the ground. And I'll continue, and I assure each and every one of those candidates that I will continue to take up the fight every day that I'm in office. And to the tens of thousands of people who voted One Nation all across the state, I also say a big thank you. My electorate is now the whole of New South Wales. It's very exciting. I hope to go out there and meet many people across different towns and regions, and I'm delighted if I have the opportunity to have as many street meetings. As somebody who came from local government, I enjoyed having street meetings and meeting people. It's the way you should be actually going to the people themselves. And there's nothing better than being in a neighbourhood and catching up with people and actually asking them what are the true issues that matter to them and how you can actually assist. Mr. President, and of course I do need to thank my family. I particularly want to thank my mother. Sadly, my father has since passed since my first inaugural, and indeed I want to thank my children and my extended family. Thank you for always being a rock of support to me throughout my time in public life. We have certainly had some difficult times throughout my public life, and I want to particularly thank my family who have gone through a lot with me together. In my first inaugural speech, Mr. President, I said, we all have and represent different views and opinions. What determines whether our views and opinions will influence public discourse and public policy is whether each of us has the strength of our convictions and the fortitude and character to prevail in the rough and tumble of our political process. This is what people judge us on today, conviction and character. As politicians, we stand before the public to be judged on our performance of service. I can only renew the same earnest and unequivocal commitment I made 12 years ago to do my best to serve the people of New South Wales. Whether I'll be judged successful or found wanting, I do not know. But let this be the metric of the judgment, conviction and character. Thank you, Mr. President.